All right, so we've had plagues, we've had earthquakes in the Roman. Now we're talking about the primitive persecutions, the persecutions that face the church. And we read those verses from all who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. That is a promise. Okay, so, all right. Okay, so let's talk about this, okay? We're going to talk about these things now. Just what was the nature of this, okay? I think this is both like, don't be haunted by this. I mean, it is pretty, I don't have like I don't have very graphic pictures, so I mean, maybe sort of some of them are. But I mean, this is part of the blood of the church. The blood of the saints are the seed of the church. One of the early church fathers made that statement, talking about the way the church would continue to expand and grow as the martyrdoms happened. So the persecutions, these first ones, number one, this one began in 67 under Nero. They really are initiated by the emperor, 67 A.D. So this was Nero burned Rome, and then of course blamed it on the Christians, and they started to persecute it. Most persecutions were local mob scenes. As the time goes on, as things happen, with the at certain points there was serious empire-directed persecutions, which meant that, like, really from Rome, they're saying, kill the Christians. And they're ordering them, or they're ordering the Christians to offer to the gods because of the superstitions that are perpetuated in the culture at that time, those superstitions. The reason we're having famines, the reason we're having floods, the reason for the earthquakes and the volcanoes is because the gods are not satisfied. A quarter of our empire is not offering to the gods, they're speaking to another god. So 67 A.D. Nero was the first primitive persecution, and that Peter and Paul were the most famous ones who were martyred at that time. So this is Peter and Paul were both martyred at that moment, at that time during the persecution. So these primitive persecutions. So this is part of what Christians sort of faced. Wild animals, crucifixion, a large audience. Usually, the Colosseum was the place. It was like the Colosseum would have certain things going on in the morning, and then around lunchtime it would be execution time. And the Christians were, because they didn't fight back, they were just put out there really just for sport, and just were killed mercilessly. So the second persecution came under this emperor, Domitian, and this came in 81 A.D. So we'll talk some from the book here also, the Fox's Book of Martyrs, just to see these persecutions. These first two, it was primarily some people in the Bible, you'll notice, are being killed off at this time. During the second persecution, 81 A.D., this is Timothy. Timothy was persecuted. Disciple of the Apostle Paul. And the pagans were about to celebrate a feast. And what Timothy wanted to do was stop the feast. He met the procession. They were having, a march through Rome, and they were having a march through Ephesus, and he saw it, and he got in front of the parade. You get run over by the by the police officers in New York City if you got in front of the Macy's parade. So this is a different kind of parade. They're going to the temples to sacrifice, and Timothy got in front of them and really told them that their offerings were doing no good. They were offering things to demons. And he was reproved. He reproved the people for their ridiculous idolatry. and they beat him with clubs, and he died 2 days later. So he was the primary, he was the most famous person that died during that period of persecution. The third persecution came in AD 108. So this, now remember, 81, that's just 2 years after the volcanic eruption. So the persecution really was sort of tied to these kind of things. Now here, Trajan, there's wars and everything going on, trying to, fighting for the battle. Trajan, this is 108, he begins a persecution. They put thousands of people to death. Let's see, Ignatius, not the Ignatius Loyola, that is like a Catholic, a Roman Catholic. This is Ignatius, the early church father. He was the bishop of Antioch. Now you see 108. This is 108 when they start. They summon him to Rome. They summon him to Rome, and here's what he says. On his way to Rome, he told the people at Rome, do not try to stop my execution. Do not try to stop my execution. So he says this, I'm just beginning to be a disciple. Now I begin to be a disciple. I care for nothing, visible or invisible things, so that I may but win Christ. He said, let the fire and the cross and the companies of wild beasts, let the breaking of bones and tearing of limbs, let the grinding of the whole body and all the malice of the devil come upon me, so I may win Christ. I am the wheat of Christ. I'm going to be ground with the teeth of wild beasts, so that I may be found to be pure bread. So that's Ignatius's. That's his prayer there. You can see here. This is how despicable maybe they were. This was the decoration in a house. Kind of interesting. They just this is a mosaic. Someone had to take all the little tiles and make this kind of gruesome little picture. So sorry, but this is another one that we. So that's what we're going on there. So Ignatius was, he was killed in the. He was given to the wild beasts, and that's how he died. He was fed to the wild beasts. So that's really a picture of his execution. Okay, the fourth persecution came. This fourth persecution came under Aurelius. Now this happened. There was a good period of peace here, and the Christian church, actually Catholic with a small c, the church kept was moving, and there was a time of probably about 115. Remember, they killed Ignatius. Where was he from? Antioch. Where was the massive earthquake? Antioch. 115. So God gave him 7 years to realize what they did to the bishop of Antioch, and then earthquake was allowed. I just tend to connect these things in my mind. As I read history, I connect these things to the treatment of the church brings about something. I mean, that we should take comfort in. God will make sure, and there is that passage in Revelation where the martyrs who are there, how long, Lord, how long until you will, bring vengeance, bring vengeance and repay those who have shed our blood. So this is Marcus Aurelius. He is the emperor at this time. He's a soldier, and he likes order. And this is 162 AD. So he's stern and severe, and the most famous. There's a couple of people that died during this time. Polycarp. He's an early church father, and we'll talk about him later in this class in the next section. But he was the bishop of Smyrna, which was near that part of Asia Minor, and he was discovered by a child, and he went. They asked him to reproach Christ. I'll release you. He was going to be burnt in the marketplace. And Polycarp answered, 86 years I have served him, and he's never wronged me once. How then shall I blaspheme my king who has saved me? And he was at the stake. They didn't even tie him. He said, you don't even have to tie me. I will stand and take my punishment. So here we have a picture of this. This is him there. Polycarp is there. The flames would not touch him. The flames would not touch him. And the flames encircled him, and when they saw it, they pierced him with the sword, and the blood came out and put the fire out. So he is being stabbed there, that his blood will flow out in such a manner that all of the fire will be put out, and he will die that way. Polycarp was probably, what would be a good picture of him? He was probably, he's probably a lot like Pastor Schiavelli. He didn't do a lot of writing, but he was an exhorter of, living a gospel life, So in the fire, he was so hot the fire couldn't touch him, so they had to stab him, But that's how he died there, singing unto Jesus. Many of these things, many of these stories, you'll read other stories, they were singing unto Jesus as they died. The other one that died at this time was Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr. And, his name was Justin, and he became known as Justin Martyr because he was martyred. And he was a philosopher. And he was a lover of truth, and, and Stoic. But then about 133, he turned to, wait a minute, that's different. So he turned to Christianity at 133 and lived this kind of a great life for 30 years. Lived a great life for 30 years, preaching and teaching the gospel. And then about this time, he was also martyred. He was martyred for his faith. His was a little bit more. He just had his head cut off. That was that's not there. So sorry, I thought I had a picture of his head getting cut off. Sorry, but but I'm sorry. I know you don't want to. I know I don't mean to. This is not the other thing but this is the one thing we want to go to. This is the catacombs, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit. But this became a place. Okay, catacombs are interesting. There's a network of about 600 miles of this honeycomb-like thing in the sand and the limestone that's beneath Rome. The city actually, and these are burial vaults that are on the left and the right. But there's also, Christians, because as the persecutions go on, they get more intense. And Christians would have to find their place to hide, and they would hide in this place down there. So we'll go back to that in a second. Talk about that, but just listen to some of the things that are written. The reason that these catacombs existed was because there's people called fossors, Fossors, fossors. They would dig the sand out, and they were very poor people. Most of them were believers, but they would dig the sand out, and all of those hiding places were there because they took the limestone out to build the temples to the other god. So the place where the Christian church was preserved was the place where they took the material to make their temples for the idols and their houses and their governmental places. So the fossors were these men. They were very pale. They lived underground a lot. Christians would go to this hiding place because in 5, it will be Severus. That's a good one, Severus, what a name, because he was a severe persecutor. 192 AD would become his next thing. And under his would be Irenaeus, another early church father. He was the bishop of Lyon. And Irenaeus, there's an AE kind of thing there that works there. He was beheaded. He was because of what he did as a Christian. And also this one of these pictures that we have here, this is the famous story of Perpetua. here. She was a married lady of 22 years, and Felicitas, another married lady who was with child, they were put into the Roman in Carthage, which is in Africa. They were put into the amphitheater, and they were killed. And they were, the wild beasts came, and they had a mad bull that gored one of them, and then, mercifully she just gave her throat to the sword because she was, so there. But so she was. That's how she became one of the famous martyrs, one of the first famous martyrs in the African. So this is going on all over the empire. They're having these persecutions. So this is the fifth one that happened under Severus, and it happened in 192. In between this time, what happened in this time? We go back to the 10 things that are happening. The plague. 25 million people are dying, throughout the Roman Empire because of the plague. So the plague is happening. This is a major persecution. This is a major persecution. And so you have these plagues. The sixth persecution comes in 235. 235, the sixth persecution. This is under Maximus. And he was, his primary thing was to demand that he was to demand that he be honored as a god, and he did all he could do to exterminate Christians. That was his primary thing, to exterminate the Christian movement that was going there. But he was an emperor for very long. There was but he stirred up persecutions throughout the empire. The seventh persecution was under Decius. Decius, and this is when they started offering great deal of money. This was in 249, and you can see that they're starting to increase in frequency. You had some space between this one, you had some good space between this one and the next one, and now you have 192. And then there, 235, 249, they'll start coming every few years now that they'll have, these persecutions. This one of these, it ran about, 2 or 3 years this persecution happened. This is one, there's a woman named Agatha. The famous story here is Agatha. She was beautiful. And the governor of Sicily wanted her as his wife, or at least his mistress. And so she refused, and so she was put in charge of a prostitute. And then a prostitute, figuring that hanging around a prostitute would break down her resistance, but it didn't break down her resistance. And then it says here that he was Quintian, the governor of Sicily, was enamored with her. He tried every artifice to win her to the desired prostitution, but all of his efforts were in vain. Let's see. On confessing that she was a Christian, she was scourged, burnt with red-hot irons, torn with sharp hooks. And having borne these torments, she was next laid on live hot coals intermingled with glass, then carried back to prison. And then she expired on February 5th, 251. So, that was, they didn't just cut their heads off. They were they were going to make you, the tortures that they were giving you, these are the kind of things that they were starting to think about. So, scourged and burnt with hot irons, sharp hooks, and then laid on coals. So, sorry, I know. All right, number 8. Number 8 comes just a few years later. This is under Valerian. Valerian is the emperor, and this happens in 257 A.D. This is the 8th persecution. The 8th persecution. Now, there's a famous story here of Lawrence. Now, Lawrence. Valerian. this persecution lasted about 3.5 years. So that was like, that also stirred up some false ideas that maybe this was the tribulation, because of it, because of the way it happened, that way. So you can just understand that we're talking about the we're talking about the external kind of troubles that the church is having, with persecution. Then that last part of the class will talk about the internal problems of false doctrine and heresy, and how the church fathers, the fighting fathers who protected the canon of scriptures and the basics of faith. So right now, this 3.5 years. So you can think 3.5 years. People are thinking it's the Great Tribulation, but it's not. But there's a story of Lawrence. Valerian really just wanted money, and he heard that the church took offerings and they had treasure. So he said, I would like you to surrender all of your treasure. I'll give you 3 days. So he gathered all of his church into the building. Lawrence gathered all of his church into the building, and then they came back, and all these poor people, they're all in the same building, and they said, I want to know what your treasure is. So this is what Lawrence said. These are the precious treasure of the church. These are the treasure indeed, in whom the faith of Christ reigns, in whom Jesus Christ has his mansion place. What more precious jewels can Christ have than those in whom he hath promised to dwell? And so God, what greater riches can Christ our Master possess than the poor people in whom he loves to be seen, So that just enraged the guy, and it says here that Valerian, when this happened, it says his eyes of fire like glow, his mouth like a boar, foamed, and his teeth like a hellbound grinned. And he said, kindle the fire, and he was burned at the stake. He was burned at the stake that way. He was just thrown right into the fire. And that was, that's one of those famous, if you have Fox's Book of Martyrs, you can read the whole story of these people. They're really, it's really interesting to read these. It's good to read these every now and then, just to realize that, what's going on right now really isn't the worst, So that's 257. In 274 is the 9th persecution. The emperor at that time is Aurelian. This will happen in 274. 274. So, and this is an extensive one. This one will last. This persecution will last. These next two persecutions all overlap, really. When you think about it, they really overlap. They don't. In the year 286, this is the Theban Legion. You've probably heard stories of this. I think there's a couple songs written about it. The Theban Legion, they were Christians, and there's 6,666 of them. Not the mark of the beast, but 6,666 men, all believers of one Roman legion. Okay? They're losing the war. Okay, remember, there's battlefields going on, and they're losing the war. And the emperor says at this time that he wants a mass sacrifice. He wants a mass sacrifice to him and to all the gods at this time. And so they refuse. So the first thing they do is they said, okay, if you refuse, we're going to take a tithe. And 1/10 of them were killed. Every 10th man was killed. So that didn't do it. They said, they decided that they would not sacrifice to the idols, but they sent a letter to the emperor and said, we will fight for you and for Rome. Just we will not worship gods, but we will fight, as is our commission. We will fight to you, and we will fight in the name of the empire. We will fight in the emperor in the name of Rome, but we will not worship you as a god. And they thought that was the leaders of the troop, the leaders of the legion said, if you do that, because they did another tithe. They did 10% of them, killed 10% of them, and then they killed another 10% of them, and then they thought that that they might that might stop it, but it didn't. The emperor was enraged and said, "Kill them all." And so they were executed. They were all cut to pieces with swords on 286. So 6,666 soldiers. Now remember, these are the Christians were some of their best soldiers. And, they were just, it wasn't enough. They just slayed these people, slayed these men because they would not give up. They would not give up Christ. Okay, 10. The 10th persecution, this is the last one, Diocletian. Okay, now this is the point where they've gone through 303 AD. The empire is really splitting in half. It's fragmenting. There's all kinds of problems with this. And famines and floods are continuing. Little diseases are breaking out all over the empire. And there's 60 million people and 15 million believers, 15 million Christians. 15 million Christians. So, this is what it's gotten to. And then this man, this emperor, this is called the era of the martyrs, because this was probably, on the 23rd day of February, it was going to be like, that Esther stopped what was going to be like a massive massacre of Jews. Well, this was the day that they designated to have a massive massacre of Christians, and they did. All Christians were apprehended and imprisoned, and the persecution became general in all the Roman provinces, but particularly, and it lasted 10 years. 10 years, 303 to 313, which is, that was the moment it became legal to be a Christian. Primarily because Constantine, one of the emperors, the empire is divided at that point, he saw a cross in the sky with Latin words written around it, "In this sign conquer." And so he determined that the Christian faith must be the faith that's real. And so he instituted that it would be the Roman religion. It would be the primary Roman religion. He became a Christian, supposedly, and it became a primary Roman religion, and that's the end of the persecutions, and the church became official, which presented new problems, primarily internally. But it was just, let's see if I can find one story from this for you. One story from this period of time. We could just start. Just the scope of this. This was a all continents kind of persecution. So it was happening in Britain. It was happening in France, Gaul, those territories. It was happening in Africa. Racks, scourges, swords, daggers, crosses, poison, famine, all of these were made use of in various parts to dispatch the Christians, and invention was exhausted to devise tortures against them. The city of Phrygia, the entire city was burned because it consisted of all of Christians, and none of them survived. None of them survived. So, okay, so what happened? So that's your 10 primitive persecutions. Now, we want to talk about this, the hiding place. God providing this hiding place, and this place is that hiding place. This is the catacombs underneath the Rome, underneath Rome. So it was said that the Christians their life consisted of the Colosseum and the catacombs. If they were in the Colosseum, they were dying. If they were in the catacombs, they were living in this dark, dank kind of place. Obviously, this is illuminated. Back then, it's not illuminated. It was only illuminated with torches that went there. And the fossers, I said that the fossers were the people that dug this out. So let me read you something here. This is a really, if you can get a hold of this book, Martyr of the Catacombs, it's just a great story. It talks about 600 miles of, let me see if I got this here, 600, there it is. There's a British film crew went in and like sort of lit up everything. They put some sort of, and then they took this picture from a satellite, and that's just one network of what is under Rome. So you can imagine you could enter, I guess, at this part, and just find your way all the way over to the other side of the city. And that's pretty much the way it happened. And you can see multiple entrances. The catacombs. Okay, this is about a soldier who's assigned the duty of rooting out the Christians from the catacombs. He's a great soldier, but you have to read the whole story. What?
Is catacombs like a generic term because that's like well known in Paris, right?
Well, yeah, there's a catacombs under. Yeah, they bury the poor down there. Yeah. Catacombs just mean it's a with the small c, so we could call these the Roman catacombs. The catacomb is like it's like a beehive, like a honeycomb of tunnels is what that is. So here it is, the catacombs. It's a subterranean district that extends to unknown bounds underneath the city. The Christians fly to the catacombs whenever there is danger, and they're also in the habit of burying their dead there. Once there, they are beyond the reach of the state. Who made the catacombs? The soldier asks. No one knows exactly. They've existed for ages. I believe they were excavated for the sake of getting building sand for cement. See? They scooped out these places in the catacombs for the cement. Let me give you another couple pictures. You get I'm spoiling it there. This is another picture of what it looks like beneath there, just like how they were there. They scooped out the sand, and then there you can see just some of the entrances there. Like they make their way all the way down to the river there, and that's how it sort of, you could see just how it all looks there. So that's kind of cool. That's how they would take their places there. So let's see. There are innumerable entrances. That's why the difficulty. So you can see there are innumerable entrances. That's why the difficulty in finding them. Let me see here. Let's see. Let me read. I don't want to read the whole thing here. The fossers who still excavate sand for the builder, they're nearly all Christians, and they always work cutting out graves for the dead of the Christians. This was primarily what would happen. When there would be a persecution at the Colosseum, the Christians would come and collect what was left. Okay? If they were given to wild animals, it might have been very small amount of material, body parts left, and they would take them and give them a proper burial. And you'll see like some of the things there that were put over those little burial things. Let's see here. I have heard of the catacombs, but never before knew anything about them. It's strange that they are so little known. Could not these fosters be engaged to lead the guards through this labyrinth? No, they will not betray the... Have they been tried? Certainly. Some comply and lead the officers of justice through the network of passages till they get bewildered. See, they would get lost in the passages. The soldiers would get lost in the passages. Then they are asked to be led back. The foster declares that the Christians must have fled, and so takes the soldier back to the surface. And no soldier has ever been resolute enough until they find the Christian. So he's taking this story they don't even have it's an anonymous story about this one soldier who actually meets the Christians, and you'll have to read the story. It's got a good ending. So that's the way. Let's see. Okay, my prospect of success seems small, he's telling him, very small, but much is hoped for from your boldness and shrewdness. If you succeed in this enterprise, it will be to your fortune. Farewell. You have learned from me all that I know. You will find no difficulty in learning more than from any one of the fosters. So Marcellus, who's the soldier who's got the assignment, leaned his head on his hands, lost himself in thought, but amid his meditations came the strains of that glorious medley that he heard at the Colosseum, sung by the girls, unto him that loved us, to him that washed us from our sins. So that's the way the story starts, as he sees this band of children get killed singing a song, little girls getting eaten in the Colosseum, and then he gets this assignment to go into the catacombs and find these things. Now, this was their hiding place, so the early Christians had this hiding place. Now, these are some of the things that they found there. You see, these are some of the little inscriptions that they found there, the drawings there. On the graves there, peace there, the dove coming there. You can see that the peace of God there. Then this one also is kind of interesting. The preacher, or he's coming out of the tomb praising God or whatever, but that's another thing there. That's another thing that they found drawn on the catacombs there. That sort of does look like Pastor Schiavelli, like preaching the gospel, doesn't it? Just like preaching the gospel there. And so you get like the catacombs are a resource, a reservoir of history for this there that you can see there. They would hide in these places there. Okay. Let's see what's the next one here. This is a little thing about feeding the sheep. So you can see that feeding the sheep, the good shepherd. These drawings are all over these places underneath Rome. These little places that they went to escape from the persecutions. Now this is what is going to happen at this time. Diocletian, the empire is going to split. It's going to fragment. So this is what's happening. The Christians have found their hiding place. They are living under there. It's estimated at some point, 600 miles of caverns, it's estimated at some point in these places, in these little places, it's estimated that as many as 600,000 people may have been living there at one point during the height of some of the persecutions. Because every believer was trying, so 600 miles of caverns, so they're living in all these spaces. There were wide open areas. Now, 600 miles is all that they've found. That's estimated that these things just went on forever. The Christians would dig out a place to survive, and so they did. So now this is interesting here. Now you see, this is some of the things that are, the galleries. Okay, let's see. In these, the dead bodies were placed, and these slabs were placed over the place where the dead bodies were, and they would tell a story of the Christian church, and they buried their dead in these catacombs. And when the graves had been opened, their skeletons would tell the terrible tales of what they suffered. Heads would be cracked, and dislocated shoulders and ribs and everything like that. They would have scorched bones. They would find these things when they went there, and they would see the awful story of persecution. But the inscriptions would be there. Now, these are some of the inscriptions, like just when you think about Rome, just near the Appian Way, which is, I'm not quite sure where that is in Rome, but near the Appian Way was these massive burial mausoleums for the great families of Rome, supposedly, the great families of Rome. And here's the kind of thing that would be written on their tombs. Like, these are the kind of inscriptions that were written on the tombs of the Roman families. Live for the present hour, since we are sure of nothing else, on the pagan tombs. I lift my hands against the gods who took me away at the age of 20, though I had done no harm. Once I was not, now I am not. I know nothing about it, and it is no concern of mine. This is what's written on these families. Traveler, curse me not as you pass, for I am in darkness and I cannot answer. Speaking truth, probably. So, but on the symbols on the walls for the Christians, and the inscription would say, like, here lies Marcia, put to rest in a dream of peace from God. Lawrence to his sweetest son, borne away by angels. Victorious peace in Christ. Being called away, he went in peace. So you had this, this place of hiding that God gave them. You had this place where they would go, and they would live there, and they would survive. God covered them. God protected them. God, certainly many died, and they would honor the dead, but they would not give up. They would not give up, and they would fight in this way to hide. Because Paul instructed them to live as good citizens, to pay their taxes, to obey the laws and all that. And they were living in that faith. Down here they would have their torches, they would have their Bible readings, and they would have, their meetings and singing and everything like that. We know the kind of things like the executions that were there, being burnt alive, bound by the feet. Other things that were done to the Christians, they would be bound by the feet to the tails of wild horses and oxen and dragged to death. Burned with brass plates of red-hot iron in the tenderest places on the body. They would do these kind of things, and that's the kind of life that they had at this point. But this place was a place of refuge for them underneath. Like, I think it's Psalm 34. We can read that. Psalm 34 is, you think of David in the cave, and we'll read this just to finish this part of the class. Psalm 34, this is a psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, the Philistine, and he scribbled with his, he drooled on his beard and scribbled. But then he was in the cave with 400 distressed, deranged, indebted people. And this is what he said: I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul shall make its boast in the Lord. The humble shall hear of it and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I love this. I love this because it's like this is the story of the church and body life. It's like this is, I will bless the Lord. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will be in my mouth. My soul makes it boast in the Lord. But then it changes here. Magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. So it's like it's the both sides of our life. We have a relationship with the Lord, and his praise is in my mouth, but then there is a life in the church, and they preserve this. This is what kept these people underground believers. We know the story of Richard Wurmbrand. We'll tell it towards the end of the semester in the spring. But he spent over 2 years in a solitary confinement cell under the ground, never seeing the light of day. And he survived. And we have his books. He's home with Jesus now, but we have his books. There's a story that God would give him something to preach every night to his cell, and he would preach to the unseen hosts that were there and to the rats and the bugs that were in his cell. And he would preach, but there's a story that he was preaching in a cell in Romania, and in Canada, a prisoner heard a message in his cell, and the prisoner heard the message in Canada and believed in Jesus Christ and became a believer. So God is not confined by time and space. He picked up a book of Richard Wurmbrand's and read it, and the sermon that he heard in his cell in Canada was the sermon that Richard Wurmbrand preached in his cell in Romania. So they say, well, that's incredible. No, it's supernatural. It's God. It's like, don't you get a text message on your cell phone? Do you think that this is not possible, that a message could go from one part of the world to the other? We know this is possible now, right? And we also know that it was said of Elisha that Elisha knows what the king says in his bedroom and prays for victory for Israel. So we know that that's, this kind of thing can happen. So they kept there, so just think of that. They humbled themselves. They were glad. I sought the Lord, and he heard me, and he delivered me from all my fears. May not be delivered from the persecutions, but this is the end. This would be the end for us. This would be like people would be putting these things in front of our graves. That's the way I want to be. I hope that they're like, that's what they put on mine if that ever happened to me. Wouldn't you like to have that on your thing? Or maybe this. Look, I was a good shepherd. I shared the word with people. The great shepherd lived in me, and I was a good shepherd according to his call. All right, so that's good, okay? That's good for us right now. All right, we'll take a break. All right, we'll take another break. We'll be back in a little bit. Okay? All right, so, and then we'll talk about the internal. I'm sorry. Okay.